Kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News, and it's a very big hairy welcome to Byron Clark. Byron, good evening to you, sir.
Kia ora.
Good to be with you, man. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, good, mate. Now, Chewy's probably going to join us at some stage. I'm not sure whether he's going to come into the actual room or just stick in the chat, but he'll be around as well. I've kind of left it up to him. You can do whatever you want, Chewy. Last time you and I talked, I heard the popping. I heard the popping of sound. That means probably Chewy is with us. Hello, sir.
Communication.
That's cool, man. So you're coming in to join? You're going to have a chat with us?
Yep.
Oh, very
I'll
good.
Also be in the chat with folks
in the chat
as well.
Byron, last time you were with us, there'd been some pretty heavy stuff going on in your world. People turning up to your workplace with videos, and I don't know if they officially doxed you, but certainly kind of putting you out on their streams, turning up to a workplace, which is pretty aggressive.
Yeah, and I mean making it pretty clear where I worked, which is a form of doxing. People know where I am for most of the day.
Right. So they didn't actually say, you're at this address, but showing the location and that kind of people can find it out pretty easily.
You can find it pretty easily if you know some of those details. So.
Yeah. And so I guess the first question is how are things now? How are things since then? Has things settled down a bit? Are you doing all right?
Yeah, things have settled down a bit. Yeah. I mean, I get I get a bit of pushback whenever I publish something, an article, a video, whatever. But it's I said to saying to somebody else, the things are back at baseline. The baseline's not zero, but
right.
it's at the baseline now.
Well, if people push back when you publish things, I guess you've had a pretty freaking busy week then, because first thing I saw on your Twitter feed was your first peer-reviewed paper, the New Zealand Media and Occupation of Parliament, which we'll get into shortly, but also you put a manuscript for a book. What's the book all about? I mean, obviously, we know the general context, but what it's about specifically? Yeah,
so I've written the book. Well, it's not completed yet. The manuscript's in, but there'll be more work to do. It's not out till next year. But I've written a book on the far right in New Zealand, and really the way it's structured is let's look at the occupation of Parliament grounds and how did we get to this point. So it looks at all the different groups that were involved and just the changing landscape of disinformation on social media and the internet more broadly over the past 5 years. But I also reach back a bit further and look at the origins of some white supremacist ideas with colonization and so forth. So, pretty, I don't know if I'd say comprehensive because there's a lot more to be said than what's even in the book, but it covers a range of, gives you a very wide understanding, I think, of the far right in New Zealand. So I'm looking forward to being able to share that with people when it comes out.
If there's a lot more to come, I guess that makes it volume 1. Does it? Volume 1 of several.
Well, possibly, it's, and I've said before, it's the kind of research you hope you kind of wish there was nothing to do if you're this kind of researcher. But I think there'll be more, even since I sent that manuscript in, a few articles have come out. So, well, if they'd been a week earlier, I might have cited that in a chapter, but no. It's a phenomenon that I think is going to be here for a while, sadly.
Yeah. I was talking about this with a workmate of mine today, actually, because he sort of we were talking about the pipeline of radicalization of people online into harder and harder groups, and just how much that shared with some of the circles that he was floating in online.
Oh, yeah.
Being a fan of edgy comedy on 4chan and stuff like that. And I'm like,
yes, yeah.
Yeah, you might be able to pick it, but some people just end up getting dragged farther and farther to the right through that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we talked about last time, or we certainly talked about one time. I used to love, and I still kind of do, going in and talking to the flat earthers. But when I saw the flat earth groups were the ones that started calling the Christchurch massacres the false flags, I'm like, oh, it's like this is a bit of fun and a bit of nonsense around that. But you scratch. In fact, I've funnily enough, talking about scratching the surface, I did a podcast once with a Professor Stephen Lewandowski, who's done a lot of research on climate deniers, and I talked to him around COVID times, and a lot of his research on climate deniers can just get pulled straight across. And I was about to say, scratch the surface of a fairly harmless flat earther. You don't have to go too deep until you find someone talking about false flag operations within New Zealand and 51 dead, New Zealanders, and so it's pretty scary. But what I'll do, and I wasn't planning on doing it this way, is I've actually queued up a clip from it. It's only a couple of minutes, and the question that I asked him in the actual podcast was, why and how do people fall into conspiracy theories? Feels appropriate for our conversation tonight. Let's have a listen to what Professor Stephen Lewandowski said about that.
The other thing we have to talk about, if we talk about science denial, is conspiracy theories, because you scratch the surface a little when you talk to somebody who is rejecting well-established scientific facts, and you'll find a conspiracy theorist sooner or later. I can almost promise you that. You just spend a few minutes, kind of ask a few questions, and ultimately you get to the conspiracy very quickly. And that is important to understand, because dealing with people who believe in conspiracy theories is challenging, because by definition, a conspiracy theory is a self-sealing edifice. In other words, a conspiracy theory is designed to turn any contrary evidence into evidence for the theory, as well as the absence of evidence, turning that into evidence for the conspiracy theory. So by the time you get to your conspiracy theory, you got a completely closed bubble, sort of like a Mr. Beanish epistemic bubble, where there's only one person inside, or one theory, and everything else finds no admission.
I'll try and find the point at the very end of this little clip from that podcast I did. And Chewy, you've probably heard me talk about motivated cognition before. This is the professor who talked about that. It's the theory, and I'm pretty sure the time's about here, where he explains conspiracy theories and how they use motivated cognition. I might not hit the exact point, but it's only be within 30 seconds of it. See if I can find it.
That's completely incoherent, and yet people will say that sort of they'll juxtapose completely incoherent ideas without detecting the incoherence.
Yeah,
and that's inevitable, because if you're denying well-established science, you cannot do that and be coherent. Because if there were a coherent alternative, the scientists would have proposed it. They would be debating it. But these are sort of markers of flawed cognition that is motivated rather than evidence-driven. And once you understand that as a member of the public, you at least have a tool to sift the noise from the signal.
It also makes me think as well, if it's a cognition issue, that it actually, the way you've described it, it gives me a sense of more empathy towards these people who aren't able to then make the leap for their own good. Anyway, so he has this theory of motivated cognition, and we've talked about this before. It's like, conspiracy theorist stands here, their conclusions over here. You place science in between their path to stop them by basically, well, that's not possible because of this evidence, and they just find a different path to the same conclusion. Motivated cognition. Now, I know that we might be talking about alt-right politics and that, but it's pretty heavily tied within. I mean, we're talking about the vaccine mandate, that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, he's someone I reference quite a lot, and I like how he also ties in the conspiracy theories around climate change, which he says relates to conspiracy theories in general. How tie that in tied in it is to people who believe in a free market principle as well. So there is a very big Venn diagram between conspiracy theorists and free market states. And I remember saying to him, but a lot of the like anti-vaxxers I know are kind of lefty loons who don't want aluminium in their body and that kind of stuff. Bless you all. And he was like, that's probably more evident of the circles you run in, because if you had 500 people in a room who believe that, you'd struggle to find a representation of those people. He says the free market people are the ones that are far more. And I think you see that, that term alt-right and those ideas, especially with the stuff you've been looking at.
Yeah, you see an interesting mix of politics there. Like I'm definitely seeing, and this is something I touch on a fair bit in the book, but it's one of those things where I could go into deeper, which is why I'm thinking there's so much more that could be said. But the shift from pandemic conspiracy theories to climate change conspiracy theories that's happening now that we don't really have many vaccine mandates anymore if you're not working in healthcare, and the pandemic is definitely not over, but it's no longer this big frightening thing that it was in 2020. I can already see that shift happening, where there was this talk in these circles of the pandemic being a hoax in order to bring about like some kind of global one world communist government or whatever. And now it's just switched to, what else is a hoax? Climate change and all of the, even this new report that was released by the government recently looking at adaptation and which included things like managed retreat from areas where sea level is going to be rising. And I saw Voices for Freedom, who have just put something out encouraging people to run for local office this year. And they talked about fighting the significant natural areas and fighting the managed retreat, which is going to get harder and harder as the sea level rises to fight the managed retreat. But so you can see that this was this is an anti-vaccine group, but it's never been just about vaccines. It's been about, pushing this idea of, the new world order or one world government. Conspiracy theories that have been around for decades. It's just coming out of all of that.
Maybe we can just sell them all their property on the seashore, and they can have that, and then they can happily not worried about a managed retreat, and they can do it when the sea's coming through their kitchens. They can stick up for their freedom and have not just like a water edge property, but a water consumed property. Maybe
like a really shitty Venice.
I was going to say the whole thing about I don't know if it is a conspiracy theory or not, but I interviewed, I've got it here on my Twitter feed, I interviewed Michael Baker, because we're talking about the kind of pandemic being over. Really good day with numbers today. So it's actually not as relevant today as it was literally 2 or 3 days ago. But Michael Baker said this is the deadliest week we've had from COVID in the whole pandemic. And at the time I spoke to him, which was I think 2 days ago, 30% of the deaths that were happening, of all deaths that were happening, were due to COVID. So whilst it kind of feels like to us it's in the rear vision mirror a bit and we're sort of getting on with life, actually, the stats and figures around the more serious end of what's happening are still are worse than they've been at all. Actually, it's the deadliest week it's been. So, yeah, it's crazy. So why don't you tell us a bit about the article that you put out there? It's fascinating. I've got a few questions. I've got one particular question, actually, to do with the New Conservative Party. But tell us, it's a great article. I've read it all the way through. It's quite detailed, especially at the very end when it gets into some of the people you basically, well, I don't want to say name and shame, but certainly name the main players in this whole thing. And I was surprised when I read it for the first time. I was like, oh, yep, a few of these. Hang on, there's more of these. Oh, okay, it must be just got to here and thought, oh, okay, that's the end of it. And then another page. Oh, okay, sheesh, there's more. Okay, end of it now. Yeah. Another page. No. Okay, it must be the end of it now. Oh, okay, then we're in the references. So tell us about the article. Tell us about what you've talked about, what you've found. And it'd be good to think about it. So again, the article is titled "The New Zealand Media and the Occupation of Parliament." Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I was invited by Pacific Journalism Review, the journal that this appears in, to write an article looking at the way the media covered those events, and that came out of, I think, appearing on Media Watch to sort of talk about the same sort of thing. One of the things that happened during the occupation of Parliament grounds was the media suddenly had to pay attention to these groups that had been growing in the background on, social media, and in particular places like Telegram, after they all got kicked off of Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. And these had been growing for years, really. But the media hadn't been paying a huge amount of attention to them. So when the protests started happening, I got a bit more on the spotlight, because I'd written about counterspin media nearly a year before that, and a few really had yet. So my stuff was getting linked, and I was getting invited on, radio and television, and I did make the point that I get called an expert, but this isn't even my full-time job, and there were journalists who hadn't really been digging as deep into these people and these groups as they could have been. I think we're in a very different situation now, directly as a result of the occupation of Parliament grounds happening. But so I was asked to write a bit about that. So I looked at, here's what the media coverage was, and here's a bit more information that they missed, and some questions that weren't asked that probably should have been asked. And those questions might have come up if they'd done a little bit more digging into some of these players.
Yeah, and it's been received very well.
It has, yeah. The editor told me it's had about 2,000 people read it, which is unprecedented for them in their first week. I guess an academic journal is hardly it's not mass media, so to get a couple of thousand people is pretty good.
I wanted to ask you a couple of things. One is I was surprised to read the New Conservative Party be represented quite well amongst the group of people that you've listed. And I thought, this lovely, lovable fool who kind of started off the Conservative Party, who I actually had a little bit to do with back in the day. But he seemed like a bit of a gormless idiot, started up this party, which then evolved into the New Conservative Party. And that seems to have ridden pretty quickly into an element of the New Conspiracy Party. What's the connection between because the other thing about the I nearly said it, the New Conspiracy Party. I think we've just coined a new phrase. The New Conservative Party is the kind of evangelical Christian aspect of it. And I'm intrigued in religious stuff. Chewy will tell you, it floats my boat. I could talk about it all night. Roll his eyes. But I'm intrigued as to how the New Conservative Party linked itself to, obviously not everybody and all the voters and every person, but there seems to be some kind of connection between that and the conspiracy theory group, to a point that I actually remember Colin Craig being interviewed by Marcus Lush on Then Radio Live when Marcus Lush was doing breakfast, and Marcus was talking about some of the other things that the other candidates were saying, and he said, Colin, you think man landed on the moon, eh? And Colin went, well, yeah, that's what they say. And Marcus was like, no, Colin, you understand that people landed on, and he actually wouldn't commit to going yes 100%. And so when I see that from the founder, who I think probably in that moment was more trying to pitch to an audience than necessarily put his views out there, but when I saw that at that point, I now go, is that the starting point, the ground zero leading to the now New Conspiracy Party and the connection there?
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I really started paying attention to the New Conservatives in 2018 when they were getting involved in the campaign against the UN Migration Compact, which was essentially this disinformation campaign coming out of the far right in Europe that spread around the world, including to Aotearoa. So my first video essay that I did way back in April 2019 was looking at this campaign. So I've been aware of the Colin Craig era Conservative Party, and there's definitely a continuity there between the Conservatives and the New Conservatives. The New Conservatives, especially in the 2020 election and the lead up to that, were noticeably further to the right than the Conservatives, at least in the rhetoric and the way they presented themselves. Although in saying that, one of their policies, they have a policy of zero net migration. So they don't target any particular ethnic or religious group or anything, but they say we should, no one gets in unless somebody leaves, that kind of policy, which is, I'm sure is, economically ludicrous. But that aside,
and impossible, because if someone leaves, if a Kiwi leaves to move overseas permanently, and so a new migrant comes in, what are they going to stop the Kiwi coming back? So
yeah. But that policy's been there since since the Colin Craig era. So there were probably elements of that there at that time. I got the impression in the time that I was following the New Conservative Party closely, which is 2019, 2020, probably not following them quite as closely at the moment. But I got the impression that there was a bit of a divide there between the more sort of alt-right faction and perhaps people who were more conservative, but not conspiracy theorists. And I think they get a lot of people supporting them who maybe aren't on board with the zero net migration and things, but are willing to look aside because they're single issue abortion voters who care very much about that. But yeah, seeing Leighton Baker involving himself in the protest at Wellington was a little surprising, because I had seen him as the more moderate side of the leadership. He was the leader, and the co-leader was Elliot Ekeley, who I don't think actually attended the protests in Wellington. He was out there supporting the convoy as they passed through Auckland, but I don't think he went down to Wellington. And Ekeley was much more active in that campaign against the Migration Compact, and is also a lot more vocal on some of the more transphobic stuff that the party's doing. Whereas Leighton Baker, who I've seen speak at a couple of meetings and things, I saw him as more the traditional, conservative, somebody who could be in the National Party, like a Bill English type. But it seems that he's, leapt on board with some of the conspiracy stuff as well. And then there's his daughter, who seems even more in the thick of it than he does when it comes to this stuff.
Chantal.
Yes.
Do you think that
is a bag of cats?
Do you think that I was talking to a guy called Professor Dave the other day, who is a science podcaster, 2 million subscribers, and he has got a good chunk of his audience by not really debunking flat earthers. He does proper science, but he has a bit of fun with them every now and again. And he's of the belief that some of these big flat earthers, like the guys who have some kind of profile, honestly don't believe it. They don't believe it. They're just playing the game, and they're monetizing it. What's your thought around these guys? Is there a portion of them that don't believe it? And I don't know anything about Chantal Baker, and I'm not commenting on her in particular, but is this someone who's just found some kind of fame or infamy, you might even say, and she's writing it and she doesn't really believe it? Or are these really hard and we're in on this, we believe this is all true and accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to know for certain, because I guess anyone who's just doing this as a grift, they're not going to admit that. They've got to portray themselves as true believers, and I think most of them are true believers. There's one or two people, like there's a guy here in Christchurch who imports and sells those "Make Our Dern Go Away" hats, and I think he's mostly in it for the money. He wants to sell all these protesters hats, but he probably still believes most of what he says, maybe not all of it. And then someone like Chantal Baker, she's obviously looking to make a bit of a name for herself as I think on Facebook she's described as a news personality, and she does have a very substantial following, bigger than any of the other people listed there, because she's managed to keep her platform on Facebook, whereas a lot of them have been deplatformed from Facebook and YouTube and things. And while she's trying to build herself as a personality, that's not mutually exclusive from actually believing a lot of the stuff. So, quite possibly she really does think that, the fires were started by police or Antifa infiltrators, or these things that she was saying on the last day of the protest.
I'm always fascinated, and I guess I got to be careful, because I'm going to use the word indoctrinated. We're all indoctrinated on some level to what we believe versus what we know with certainty. So I guess me saying this out loud, someone could find something that they'll say, I'm indoctrinated on, that I don't have the evidence for. But I'm always fascinated with conspiracy theorists, whether it's the flat earthers or the anti-vaxxers or the whatever, at the indoctrination level of how easy it is to disprove them. If like a fucking idiot like me in Dunedin, without any scientific background, whatever, can find reputable sources to disprove anything anyone says almost ever. I mean, like the classic answer is the flat earth, like their maths are always wrong. The flat earthers' maths is always wrong. And it's just, and it's the same with the vaccine. You know, how many times I've had someone say something to me, I don't really participate in debating online, although I don't mind doing that so much. And you just Google search, you look around, find reputable sources. What we've been doing here with that, obviously, is talking to the professors and to the PhDs and to the doctors. So we have Anna Brooks on probably 4 or 5 times from Auckland University. And I've been saying to the contributors here, or Michael Plank or Michael Baker, like we had just a minute ago. And I say to them, I want to talk to the people in the labs rather than the people on level 9 of the beehive, because there's still a PR level to go through. But even though I've got, I mean, I guess I'm a bit privileged, but I'm working hard to do it, got access to some of these people, it doesn't seem that difficult to follow an Anna Brooks Twitter feed or a Michael Plank blog piece or the conversation and find the actual information that disputes all of this. I've always just been fascinated as to how people, you know, fall for this shit, basically. Do you think that could be the same as well when it comes to like the alt-right? Like some of the stuff they come out with, which is more of a political ideology, but is there quite a fine line between conspiracy theorist falling for something and alt-right, you know, political position, quote unquote, falling for something?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a pretty substantial overlap between the two groups. I mean, with the Great Replacement theory is a conspiracy theory, just as, you know, believing that the vaccines are a tool for genocide is a conspiracy theory, and you see both of these pushed by the alt-right, because and even sort of woven in with each other, you know, that one is to facilitate the other or whatever. So substantial overlap there, and I think a lot of similarities in how and why people start believing these things. I read a really interesting book just recently by Van Badham was her name. She's an Australian journalist, and she wrote this book, QAnon and On, A Brief History of Internet Conspiracy Cults. And yeah, I read that just recently, and I've cited it a couple of times in the book that I've written. And she talks about, that's the one there, she talks about these sort of apocalyptic narratives that we've seen throughout history over the last, you know, few hundred years, and probably going back even further. And they seem to emerge at times where there's significant economic or social change, which we're obviously doing at the moment with the pandemic and as we talked about earlier with climate change coming. And when that's happening concurrently with highly visible wealth inequality, which is another thing we have at the moment. And I think that, you know, people are out there and they're seeing that there's this great divide in society. Like a lot of the conspiracy theories that I mentioned earlier about believing the pandemic or climate change is a hoax to bring about a one world government, they believe that this is being done at the behest of, you know, various elites. So people like the billionaire philanthropist George Soros gets mentioned a lot, and there's a bit of anti-Semitism in with that one, but also people like Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, who are a very, you know, powerful organization of very powerful people. And I think that people who see themselves as, you know, being at the other end of society from these people who are, you know, so powerful and so wealthy that it's just hard to even comprehend, those people are getting into some of these conspiracy theories. And you know, we talk a lot about I talk a lot about the right, but this can happen to people on the left as well. And with the stuff around the World Economic Forum, there's even a little bit of overlap there. Like I'm kind of just old enough to remember like the anti-globalization movement in the early 2000s, and that was a target of theirs as well, with like the WEF and things. So I think that, you know, we have these broad social issues that are leading to the situation we're in, and you can't just treat it as on an individual level. You might be able to take one individual and say, well, here, let me show you the correct information, and that one individual might think, oh, you're right, this is ridiculous, but in terms of the social problem of conspiracy theories, I think that's probably going to be with us until we can really address these other social problems. And I'd say the two big ones are wealth inequality and climate change. And even with groups like Voices for Freedom talking about opposing the managed retreat and things, I think a little bit of that at least comes from this feeling of powerlessness, where something so big and frightening is happening, but the world is so divided between the average person and these people with astronomical levels of wealth and power.
Again, it's that idea of, and I mean, like talking about Soros from the left, but then again, the people on the right who are yelling that out won't acknowledge that the Koch brothers on the right are doing the same thing. It's like, so Soros may be funding a whole bunch of stuff because he's got billions of dollars and he might want to do that, but so are the Koch brothers doing exactly the same for the right. It's like, yeah. This Voices for Freedom thing, they want to get into local government. I mean, you see this playing out in the US at the moment, yeah? You see them talking about Roe versus Wade. You see the Republicans going, this has been a 20-year, 30-year plan to get in there. I was going to say, I don't want to be disrespectful to the Voices of Freedom. I don't care about being disrespectful, but I guess I'm not wanting to give them too much credit. I mean, is this something that could be a long game that could make an impact, or are these just a bunch of kind of misorganized people with big voices, loud voices, not even necessarily big, but loud voices? And as you say, like the thing I find hilarious is the protest about the mandates at the moment. And I go, what mandates? And they mention off 4 or 5 of them, and I'm like, yeah, well, that one is gone, that one is gone, that one is gone. So what are you actually protesting? And it's turned into basically an anti-government protest, just like the Wellington protest that they claimed to be about the mandates. Actually, in my opinion, wasn't. It was about the vaccine. It was an anti-vaccine protest. Do these guys have any chance of sort of making waves or making a mess for the rest of us, or are they just too small and too insignificant to do anything?
I think they're one to watch because they are more moderate, or at the very least portraying themselves as more moderate. They've made a very deliberate attempt to distance themselves from some of the more extreme elements. People like Lee Williams, who they have sort of told not to come to their meetings, and they've told their members not to share a platform with them. Even if they may believe some of the same things, I think they're smart enough to know that having somebody saying the quiet part loud is not is not good for them. But they're pushing this sort of great reset conspiracy theory and the idea that climate change is a hoax and that vaccines are harmful and all this sort of stuff. But they've been able to do it in a very slick and professional kind of way, and they've amassed an audience which is significant. On Telegram, they've got, I think, 36 or 38,000 followers. They apparently have an email mailing list with even more people than that. There'll be overlap, of course, but and they've got chapters organized around the country, and they've got some resources there behind them. They've raised money for court cases. In that post that they made about running for local office, they've even said, if you can't afford the $200 deposit, get in touch because we can raise that money for you. So there's a real a well-oiled machine in behind Voices for Freedom. So I think perhaps we're not paying as much attention as we should, and I haven't been paying as much attention to them as I have to some of the more extreme elements. I do have a chapter on Voices for Freedom in the upcoming book, and I spoke to a representative of the group FACT, Fight Against Conspiracy Theories, and as I was saying in that chapter, I've seen these people as more alt-right adjacent than alt-right, so I haven't paid a lot of attention. Right. And those are the kind of people who could potentially get elected to community boards and possibly even city council, whereas someone like, we've got a good friend of Lee Williams, Carl Bromley, running for mayor in Christchurch, and he'll probably get a few hundred votes. And Voices for Freedom are staying away from him because he's associating with more extreme characters like Williams, whereas somebody who is in Voices for Freedom or affiliated with them and just runs on a platform with a standard local government stuff like I'm pro-democracy and accountability and I'll listen to you and all that, and if they've got that Voices for Freedom machine behind them, who are doing like leaflet drops and hoardings and that sort of thing, they could get elected. So I think they're potentially more of a worry than some of the more extreme folks who aren't going to be elected into these positions. So definitely one to keep an eye on there.
So it sounds like you're talking about them like people talking about Ron DeSantis at the moment. It's like Ron DeSantis is Trump with a brain. You know what I mean? Voices of Freedom is the more professional, more slick version of the more extreme element. I'm wondering as well, you said they're well-resourced. Where's that resource coming from?
Yeah, well, that's something I'd really love to know. And I do touch on this a bit in the journal article, because probably one of the most common questions I get asked is who's funding these groups. And we need to be careful not to start getting into conspiracy theories of our own. As far as I can ascertain, there's probably no wealthy overseas backers for Voices for Freedom. They do have a lot of money, but they're probably getting it from people locally. They'll be getting a lot of that in small donations, $20 here and there. Maybe with the court cases, they have some bigger backers. They did say when they were interviewed by Melanie Reid of Newsroom that they have some large backers who have put money towards. I think they raised $200,000 for a court case against the vaccine rollout for children. A couple of questions that I think remain unanswered, which I address in that article, is that Claire Deeks, one of the three founders of Voices for Freedom, she was number 3 on the Advance Party list, and the election return filed by Advance listed a campaign expense of spending $10,000 on campaign consultancy services from a company called Dom's Kitchen Limited. Which is the company that Claire Deeks set up for her food blog. So there's a question there of why did Advance New Zealand spend $10,000 on campaign consultancy from one of their own candidates? I mean, surely, if she's the candidate and she has those skills, she doesn't need to consult herself. And, why is it a food blog company and not an actual consultancy service? I mean, people have said to me like, "Oh, that's not an outrageous sum to spend on consulting," and I'm like, "Yeah, but it's a food blog," And I don't want to sound too harsh. I mean, she is a lawyer. I mean, maybe she could be a campaign consultant, but I think there's this question there of like, why $10,000 to her, and what was that money? What did they get for that? And then what's she done with that money since? There is also the question there, and this is where, again, we've got to be careful not to start getting into our own conspiracy theories, but there is a link between Advance New Zealand and a group called Himalaya New Zealand. And Himalaya New Zealand are the local branch of a organization called the New Federal State of China. And the New Federal State of China was founded by a dissident Chinese billionaire called Miles Guo, along with former Trump advisor Steve Bannon. And they had a number of companies, many of which I think have since gone bankrupt, including GTV, which was the platform that Counterspin Media started on. And Counterspin Media also has something of a relationship with Himalaya New Zealand. And again, I don't think that Himalaya New Zealand is necessarily funding these groups. From the research I've done, it looks like rather than cash flowing in from someone like Guo or Bannon, money is, if anything, going the other way, because a lot of people associated with Himalaya New Zealand were buying this G-Coin cryptocurrency from Guo, or trying to invest in GTV and the what's it called, the New Zealand financial forget the name of the organization, but there was essentially a warning put out, like, don't invest in these entities. They're not licensed to sell you digital assets in New Zealand, and in the US there were things that came out like this, and there's been a lot of legal challenges to Miles Grow, which is probably what's led to the bankruptcy. So I think rather than this being some shadowy organization that's funding these groups, it may be more the case that money's been flowing out of New Zealand to someone who's already a billionaire. But there's still that link there, and even if there's not money changing hands, there's this ideological link, and that's one of the areas where more questions could be asked, and it's a difficult one because I know even if you get a really good journalist, who's going to get Claire Deeks or whoever on the spot and say, what's your relationship with Himalaya New Zealand? What's your relationship with Miles Grow and Steve Bannon's organizations? And we're not necessarily going to get a clear or a straight answer, but it's worth thinking about this at least. What are these links? What could be going on there? I mean, there's definitely things we don't know, and things I'd really like to know about these organizations.
I think we should jump in and take a few of these comments that have been coming in, Chewy. I think a few of them can be starred there. But also, if anyone wants to participate in the conversation with a question or a comment, you're more than welcome to. You can either do it through the chat, which is the best way to do it is off YouTube. Do it through the chat or the super chats if you want to do it that way. But also, we've got the Discord server up and running tonight. If you want to jump onto Discord and actually have a chat with us, like a call-in type thing, you can do that. If you go to the Discord, all you need to do is log yourself in. Let me just show you. Log yourself in. I'll just do that. Log yourself in, and then down here in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a waiting room. You just want to click into the waiting room, and if we see you in there, when we get a chance, we'll come and have a chat with you. The actual Discord link is now in the chat, and if you want to do that, you are more than welcome to. Shall we have a look at some of those chats? What have we had coming in?
Yeah, I've got this one here.
It seems to be so easy for some to jump from extraction of wealth by billionaires, end quote, to secret elite reptilians, end quote. A lack of education around global socio-economic systems seems to be the issue, in my opinion. Thanks, Ayrton.
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
Well, I like at the start what Professor Lewandowski actually said as well, is that, like, within this world of conspiracy theory, kind of counter evidence is evidence for your cause, as is no evidence is evidence to your cause. So, like, it doesn't matter what comes in front of you, it's evidence for your cause in a conspiracy theory.
I've also got this comment here, just drawing parallels between, I guess, sloganeering going back to some pretty dark parts.
I'm always a little bit sensitive with that kind of stuff, because it's like when you've seen those YouTube videos when someone plays 36 songs with the same 3 chords. It's like One Nation, One People. That may be accurate what David's saying, but it might also be nothing to do with the connection, unless you can educate us, Byron. But it might just be a coincidence.
I think it could just be a coincidence. I'm not too familiar with Peter North. I'm not actually sure who that is. The current leader is there's a leader and a co-leader. There's Ted Johnson and Helen Horton, and the previous leaders were Leighton Baker, and then as deputy leader Elliot Ekeley. So I'm not sure who.
Yep, Ted Johnson and Helen Horton.
Yeah, I'm not sure who Pete North is in this quote.
But it's like when people sometimes put together things that used to be and they are now, so there's a definite connection. I'm always a bit like, maybe, but also maybe
variations on a theme, and it's something that, if you didn't have the connection to the Nazis anyway, they came up with it for the very same reasons that it's attractive to other groups as well. I've got one here from Simon, which I think is a question directed to Byron here. Just a very early New Zealand group from the looks of it.
New Zealand Legion of Group in the 1930s. Have you looked into that? Do you know anything about it?
I know a little about it. Not deeply. If you're interested in more of the historical far right, definitely be on the lookout for the book Histories of Hate, which is being released, I think, in October. It's not one that I've contributed to, but I know a few people who have, and I think there may be a chapter in there even on the New Zealand Legion, and looks at groups like the League of Empire Loyalists and White New Zealand League and those sort of groups that were around in the early 20th century. That's the one there. So that'll be out, I think, October, if I remember correctly. So definitely one that I'm really looking forward to, and one that you probably want to check out as well.
Yeah, there you go. In store October 2022. So yeah,
there we go.
One thing I wanted to ask, just we were talking earlier about some of these groups trying to contest local body elections, which are coming up rapidly, and I think even the applications to run for those positions is closing out very shortly. If they manage to get some candidates in and the results don't match their particular echo chambers, what would you think their reaction would be? Would it be just an outright denial of the reality of it, or will it be a kind of a shock of like, oh shit, maybe I don't have the will of the people behind me?
Yeah, I think we'll see a couple of things. The idea of elections being rigged and things is one that's so common now in these disinformation ecosystems, and a lot of that's come out of the US election and Trump's claims that it was rigged or falsified, and those being repeated by his supporters. Because we had an election the same year, we started to see those same sort of ideas applied to our own election. Certainly, some of these groups like Advance New Zealand believed, how could they possibly have only got 1%? Everyone I know is voting for them because they've alienated themselves from their previous social network and now only associate with other conspiracy theorists. So I think we're certainly going to see a few people who will say, oh well, we didn't get in, but it's all rigged anyway. It's but I think we'll probably also see from at least some of these candidates a bit of infighting, like I mentioned Carl Bromley, who's running for mayor here in Christchurch, and there's already a bit of anger coming from himself and from his associate Lee Williams, complaining that the rest of the quote-unquote freedom movement aren't throwing their weight behind his campaign. So I think when he inevitably does very poorly in the election, there'll be a lot of blame put on other groups on the alternative right who didn't get behind the campaign, even if you add up all those groups, you're talking about a very small percentage of people, and really he's going to do poorly because a candidate with no backing from a major political party or significant personal wealth to fund a campaign is just also always going to be marginal in these elections, but it'll get blamed on the rest of the freedom movement, and it'll quite likely get blamed on election rigging or whatever.
And what about the Eastgate Mall? What part does they play in his tumble from power?
Exactly. I mean, this is if viewers aren't aware, Bromley was trespassed from Eastgate Mall, a large mall on the eastern side of Christchurch, and I think this came out of refusing to wear a mask or something like that, and he's saying it's for no reason, but you don't get trespassed for no reason. That may be a reason that is invalid, and I understand the trespass is being lifted when the mall goes under new ownership later this month. But he sees this as as an attack on him as the mayoral candidate for the freedom movement, when really they probably didn't even know that. They probably thought, oh, he's just another person refusing to wear a mask and causing trouble for people who work there. So they certainly have some delusions of grandeur, some of these people, and I think when something like that happens, they read into it a larger political meaning that isn't really there.
And look, it's that motivated cognition thing again, is that they always have the answer no matter what. I think it's Katie Hobbs, you're talking about America and about this kind of rigged elections. I think her name is Katie Hobbs. It's a female Trumpian candidate for a Republican primary who has started to talk prior to the final results coming out that it's a rigged election and it's unfair and it's this and it's that. She might win. Like, she was leading when she was saying those things because she was laying the ground for being able to claim that she didn't lose it was rigged. And now if she wins, which is fairly likely, she may have done so already, she's going to say, well, it was rigged, but it just wasn't quite rigged enough to make a difference. So luckily you all got out there and voted for me, and they tried to rig it, and they did rig it, but they didn't do good enough to be able to get the whole thing over us. Just go. They just find the right answer. So the example that you just gave, Chewy, about if they get into a local body election or a council or whatever, and they don't find that they're a representative view, they'll use that, as Stephen Lewandowski said, as evidence that they're right. See, no one's talking about this. It must be the one thing that's missing. So no matter what they do, they'll find an answer for it, and it'll be like self-aggrandizing, and it will confirm itself. I did think
I remember from the last local body election here, we had a local character, Malcolm Moncrief Spittle, ran for mayor, and I saw him at a mayoral debate, and that was certainly something. He came up with a binder about that thick. It looked like my mum's recipe book. And he just used his time to spout about how climate change wasn't real. It was a conspiracy. It was about the UN, just nutty stuff. But certainly, in our democracy and that sort of thing, if you run for a mayor or a council seat, you have a platform at least for 5-10 minutes to say whatever you want. So yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting if they get their shit together enough to get some candidates in various races.
I thought we might just wrap up also today. We'll keep looking at some chats that are coming in, keep them coming in, and we might throw them out at the end a bit more. But at sort of the biggest disinformation case going on in the world at the moment, which of course is the Alex Jones situation. And we heard today about a settlement, and to be honest, that settlement is only the first part of it. The parents, these parents we're looking at on the screen right now, were awarded $4 million, but that's just a part of it. The next case that they're being, I think, found out about tomorrow could be up to 150 million. And I just thought, like, when someone has to sit in a courtroom and look at a conspiracy theorist in the eye and say, I am real, my child was real, that just speaks to the lunacy of what, like, the extreme version of a conspiracy theory should be. So let's just play this and have a listen to what it says.
Jesse was real. I am a real mom. There's nothing out there, nothing. There's records of Jesse's birth, of me. I mean, I have a history, and there's nothing that you could have found because it doesn't exist that I'm deep state. It's just not true. I know you know that. That's the problem. I know you know that. And you keep saying it. You keep saying it. Why? Why? For money? Because you've made a lot of money while you've said it. I know I know you believe me.
So, I mean, pretty unbelievable that that's a part of the overall conversation. That she didn't have to, but she wanted to portray to this conspiracy theorist that she's real. I'm a real human being. I'm not laughing because she lost her son, but actually have to say that in the court of law because this fucking lunatic for so long has been saying they're actors, they're not real. And although you didn't see it in that clip, there's other points where there are claims being made this week that whilst he may not be saying it exactly on air this week, he is still basically hinting at the same idea that there is, maybe they're real, but there's other things going on. He called her husband like a bit simple, like he was mentally deficient. So he's still putting out, even whilst they're in court, he's putting out conspiracy theories on his broadcasts once he's out of court for the day. It's fascinating. Let's have a listen to this one. I think this is the one you were wanting to play yesterday, Chewy, when
oh yes, yeah.
Alex Jones gets confronted that they have his texts and emails and ask him about perjury, which is just beautiful.
So you did get my text messages. And it said you didn't. Nice trick.
Yes, Mr. Jones.
Oh.
Indeed. You didn't give this text message to me. You don't know where this came from. Do you know where I got this?
No.
Mr. Jones, did you know that 12 days ago, your attorneys messed up and sent me an entire digital copy of your entire cell phone with every text message you've sent for the past 2 years, and when informed, did not take any steps to identify it as privileged or protect it in any way. And as of 2 days ago, it fell free and clear into my possession. And that is how I know you lied to me when you said you didn't have text messages about Sandy Hook. Did you know that?
I told you the truth. This is your Perry Mason moment. I gave them my phone, and then
Mr. Jones, you need to answer the question.
No,
Did you know this happened?
no, I didn't know this happened. But I mean, I told you I gave them the phone over. And you said,
But just
And
answer
you
the
said-
question.
You said in your deposition, you searched your phone. You said you pulled down the text, did the search function for Sandy Hook. That's what you said, Mr. Jones, correct?
and I had several different phones with this number, but I did, yeah. Well, of course. I mean, that's why you got it.
No, Mr. Jones, that's not why.
My lawyer sent it to you, but I'm hiding it. Okay.
Mr. Jones?
Anyway, that's called someone put up on the Twitter feed today about that's what it looks like when you create a chemtrail in your pants or something like that. And this is just a minute. This is the verdict that came out today.
Alex Jones today learning the cost of his lies.
Our members of the jury have you reached a verdict?
An Austin, Texas jury saying the InfoWars host must pay $4.1 million to the parents of one of the Sandy Hook victims for years of unfounded claims like this.
Sandy Hook is a synthetic, completely fake, with actors, in my view, manufactured.
But just yesterday, Jones did an about-face from his lies about the school shooting.
It's 100% real.
For the parents of Jesse Lewis who brought the suit, the damages were far less than the $150 million they sought, but far more than the $8 Jones' attorney offered in closing arguments, $1 for each of the claims.
The jury just returned a verdict for compensatory damages exceeding $4 million. That's a darn good start. We now have the punishment phase.
But Jones may face even bigger troubles over that trove of text messages mistakenly sent to the plaintiff's attorney.
I've been asked by the January 6th committee to turn their
I mean, I don't know that.
The texts include what the attorney called intimate messages with Trump advisor Roger Stone. The committee is looking into Jones' role in the rally and riot at the Capitol. Jones' attorney asked for a mistrial based on the emails. The judge denied the request. The jury's work is not over. It will now consider punitive damages. That process will get underway tomorrow. Alex.
And that could be the process that's where the 150 million court case is coming in. But Byron, how does it feel to you to be someone who's kind of been fighting against mis and disinformation? This is like the Lord, the king of mis and disinformation, sort of on some level getting his comeuppance.
Yeah, and you can't help but feel elated seeing that happen. I mean I've been aware of Alex Jones for probably 20 years or so now. I remember first encountered him when a friend of a friend tried to pirate the Michael Moore film Fahrenheit 9/11 and downloaded something off a file sharing thing which was labeled with all these other documentary names but turned out to be one of these Alex Jones documentaries. And back then he was kind of this marginal figure on cable television and mostly just got kind of laughed at. But I've seen him over that 20 years since I first heard him sort of rise to prominence where he's now making millions of dollars off this, has this whole kind of fake news empire. I talked about GTV earlier and GTV going bankrupt. One of the places that Counterspin uploads their show to now is Band.video, which is part of Alex Jones's whole network.
Right.
So he's a major player in disinformation and has been for lot longer than the 20 years I've been aware of him, because he got to start in the public access television in the 1990s in Texas, but has grown because of social media, who have deplatformed him, but way after the point where it needed to be done to prevent things like this and the harassment that these Sandy Hook parents are getting. And there's so many similar situations. I mean, it's on a much smaller scale, but they mentioned somebody showing up at my workplace, and that's another disinformation spreader. And while this won't set a precedent legally, in this country, it does show that we can fight back against these people, and hopefully we'll see more of that, because this Alex Jones may be the emperor of disinformation, but there's a lot of smaller players who should be getting their comeuppance too.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are basically trying to emulate what he's doing on a smaller scale. Damien Dement springs to mind there.
For sure.
Just doesn't have the production quality quite down yet. Maybe if he does some more set dressing in his garage, he'll get there. We do have a fan of his in the chat.
Oh, yes,
with a contrasting view. So in the sense of fairness, I'm going to throw this one up here.
Right. Shall I read it for the people listening to the audio podcast? Digital Eye says they're entitled to their beliefs. I wonder who do we know who that is? They're entitled to their beliefs. Same as Alex. But it's not about that. It's about destroying a person. Well, respectfully, if you're saying it's about destroying Alex Jones has spent years destroying the families of the Sandy Hook families. Some of them had to move up to 7 times because people that Alex Jones encouraged through his libel would turn up on people's doorsteps, would harass them, Alex Jones made $138 million in one calendar year based on his lies and supplement sales. And now he's crying over a $4 million settlement based on libeling people. Remember, libel is a civil case, not a criminal case. And it's a very clear libel that he was claiming these parents of dead children were actors and faking it. That's it. You've lied. You've committed libel against these people. So it's not a criminal case where he's going to go to jail, and he's told a lie publicly enough that it's impacted these people to a point where a settlement is warranted. It's as simple as that. Sorry, I kind of jumped in there, Byron, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I see these kind of arguments all the time, usually in Twitter replies and things. People are entitled to their own opinions. They're not entitled to their own facts. I mean, if you are going to be going out there on, your media empire, which Jones has, and saying, these people are crisis actors, they're not real, this was a false flag, it didn't happen. The people who are being targeted by that, have a way that they can challenge somebody like Jones in this case, which they've done through a civil court case, and it's been years in the making, and we're seeing justice being done. And I think if Jones was just arguing, we shouldn't have gun control despite this, that's very different from saying this was a false flag to take our guns away. Own opinions, sure. Own facts, no. There are objective facts.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's a good one as well.
I think it's also a case, and this is something you hear reasonably often. It's not a question of freedom of speech. He's not being chucked in jail. It's not a criminal case. The government hasn't black bagged him and sent him to Guantanamo Bay. He said something. It's not true. And the people that he said it about it have taken him under civil proceedings and want to take as much money from him as possible, because that's the punishment that's available in a civil case. Freedom of speech is never freedom from consequence. You can say whatever you like in a public square. It's not going to stop someone from punching you in the mouth for saying it.
Metaphorically speaking. We're talking metaphorically speaking.
Don't punch someone in the face.
Kooky Nick says Alex Jones used other people's pain as a story for profit. I also want to put up what Scott said. Alex Jones is responsible for destroying the lives of multiple families, and not just over Sandy Hook. This is the least he deserves. Yeah, and all those gay frogs as well. You know, it's the thing. You're entitled to be wrong. You're entitled to be a moron. But when your lies, overt lies about a person or a group of people or a company or whatever, cause that person to suffer the effects of your lies, that's libel, and you can be taken to court for it. So it's it's as simple as that. So there's no real defense for this because he did it, and he knows he did it because I didn't show any clips tonight. In some of the court proceedings, he's like, "I was wrong. This is not a false flag. This is not real." Then they play all the clips of him saying it's a false flag. So he knows what he was saying. And there was actually a really interesting hour and a quarter deposition of one of his producers, and the hint from that was he knew at the time it wasn't true. And that's the thing about libel. Libel is actually quite hard to get a case for, because if you honestly believe what you're saying, it's very difficult to get a libel case against that person. So if you have an honest held belief that, you know, day is night, whatever, then that's one thing. But if it's actually not your belief and you're grifting, like you said before, Byron, and you're actually lying on purpose for monetary gain, then that's like the dictionary definition of libel. And if you're lying on purpose for financial gain about someone else, and that's the reason you're getting the gain, then they're entitled to that money, because that's why you're getting the money. You're lying about them, and there's no question that his grift over Sandy Hook made him literally hundreds of millions of dollars. Literally hundreds of millions of dollars.
Didn't they quote a number of $800,000 a show?
I'll see if I can find it. I know there was
something like that. It might have been per day or something like that, what he was raking in. Yeah,
I know there was something about 138 million. I'll just Google it while we're talking.
And now he's trying to bankrupt or claim bankruptcy, and poor me. Which I just don't see how anybody can take him on his word. I mean, obviously people do. There's people in our chat that are. Just brainworms.
One thing I'd mention as well is that we've seen a bit of this before. There was the divorce case where his ex-wife was, I think, making the claim that he wasn't a fit parent, in part because of these, you know, quite unhinged rants that he'd have on his show. And he was there in court at that point arguing, "Oh, this isn't real. This is a character I play. It's all a performance." I don't know if any of that's been brought into this most recent case. But, yeah, it's very different from if he were to go to court and, you know, and swear that he honestly believed that, you know, Sandy Hook was a false flag or any of these other things. Whereas when you put him in a courtroom, he'll say, "Oh, no, this is all just, you know, it's a performance, it's a show, it's entertainment, it's not real."
So you can't have it both ways. You can't say about can't say about your divorce settling, "This is not real," and then try and admit that this is not real in a libel case, because what you're actually admitting is you're lying. So you can't have it both ways. Tucker Carlson, that's a similar defense to Tucker Carlson when he got when Fox News got taken to court. They were like, "Well, Tucker Carlson doesn't speak the truth. It's performative. It's not real." And it's like, yeah, but it's your main opinion host saying that that you guys are saying, for the sake of saving money, that he's talking shit. Why isn't that the headline? Tucker Carlson talking shit. You know, that would be a much better title. I want to throw something at you as well, real quickly, to wrap up, because we've had some interactions and run-ins with these guys in the last couple of months. And it's sort of based a little bit around Alex Jones, thinking about who is the Alex Jones in New Zealand. And there's no one. There's not an Alex Jones in New Zealand. But there are some groups out there that you've identified that are sort of alt-right or conspiracy adjacent or conspiracy outlets or whatever. But what do you think of the platform? Because I'm pretty clear that their audience is heavily involved in anti-mandate, anti-vaccine, you know, anti-government conspiracy theories. And we've done a couple of breakdowns on this show where I said at one point they're going to have to make a decision at the platform. Do they go with this audience, or do they and monetize them, which is what Alex Jones has done, or do they reject the audience and stay probably where they are in truth, which is, you know, a right or far right group, politically speaking, but not necessarily conspiracy theorists? And it looks to me, to be honest, we did one the other week, where the kinds of guests they've got coming on, they've got a correspondent in Europe now who is against vaccine mandates and stuff. It looks like, for me, they've kind of gone down that line of let's embrace this. Do you think they've got any part to play in this as a more reputable, and I'm using air quotes, reputable source of media, with a Sean Plunkett at the helm, but they're in that camp of conspiracy theories, concerns around alt-right messages coming out?
I think there's a risk there that you've really identified, and that is that if the platform gets these people on as guests, and I've listened to a couple of these, and there usually is a bit of a pushback from the host onto the conspiracy theories, but they had like Hannah Spira, the co-host of Counterspin Media, on as one of their guests, and the host did push back on stuff she said, but it was still giving her literally a platform, potentially increasing the Counterspin audience. So it's creating, I feel like there's, in the media landscape, you've got like something like News Talk ZB, which is right leaning, but factual, it's all true. And then you've got further over, you've got, Counterspin Media, who are, far to the right ideologically and also predominantly false, fake news, conspiracy theory, whatever. But there was this kind of air gap between them where people weren't easily moving from one through to the other. And the platforms kind of popped in as like that bridge between mainstream conservatism and completely off the wall fake news, disinformation. So I think it could potentially be pulling some people closer to that way of thinking. And there is a real risk there as well, because right now, Counterspin has an audience probably a similar size to the platform. So
right.
when somebody who's a co-host to Counterspin or a regular guest on Counterspin appears on the platform, that gets promoted by Counterspin, and that gets, you look at the YouTube videos, those are the ones that have the most views because they can borrow the Counterspin audience. And like you say, if they see that audience there, if they say, this is the content that people want, this is the stuff that gets 100,000 views, we need to keep putting these people on the show, then that's a real risk, especially if the hosts start to push back less and maybe give these people more room to speak. And
the other thing is, the thing that I've been breaking down while we've been looking at this is actually, and I talked about if me and Chewy were going to do a podcast about breaking down movies and narratives of movies, then the audience we would attract would be movie people, movie buffs, and people who are interested in movies. If the audience they're attracting are alt-right conspiracy theorists, then surely that means the product they're putting out there is conducive to that group of people. Because if it wasn't, they wouldn't. And you can see that sometimes, like I've done a little bit of looking into them, and like when they say, like Michael Laws talked about, vaccine lunatics and that kind of stuff, like anti-vaxxer lunars. And when that comment came out, the Facebook page went crazy. And then they started talking about, they even take their news from NZME and News Talk ZB, so they can't be that, they're taking their news source from a mainstream media. That's the massive part of their audience. And I'll say again, if you're attracting that audience, that means your content is something that's attractive to that audience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Anything else we're getting in the chat there, Chobi, before we kind of sign off?
Look, I'm going to break a new conspiracy theory.
Cool.
Which is blowing some minds at the moment. What do we think about this one?
Never seen him leave there. He can't. He's trapped by the man. We all know the real, because Pat can't leave. I think there's been times where I've got up and like when my cam. Oh no, I haven't left the studio. I've got my camera.
We've never seen it, Pat. We've never seen you without the background, and I can't keep hiding this.
So I'm actually, I've read it, but I'm still a bit confused as to what the conspiracy theory is. What is the actual conspiracy theory?
It's part of you. The background is part of you. It's attached to you. It goes wherever you are.
I'm just having a look at my TikToks to see if there's anything about me on any of those. Oh no, look, there's mostly dog ones. Oh, hang on, here's one. Oh no, I'm not going to play that because it's ridiculous.
I'm going to find all your TikToks and Photoshop that background into the back of them.
Most of them are either the dog outside or here anyway. So, So I can't. It doesn't really help much, actually, to be honest. Oh well. I mean, then if it's me, it's the same for Byron. Because look at his background. I've never seen Byron without that background.
That's
so.
true.
So, and you as well, Chewy. Like we can use that for you. I've never seen you on screen without that background. And can I just say, Chewy, that there's something wrong with your background because it's blurry. So that just makes me think what the conspiracy theory is. It probably means that the NASA agents are getting in to cause all your books to be blurry in the background.
There's something wrong with my house. This room has always been blurry. It's like this in real life as well.
Your house needs glasses to see more clearly. All right. Hey, Byron, tell us anything else you want to tell us before we head off, because I will let people know when the book's coming out, where they can keep an eye on it, your Twitter feed, whatever else you want to tell them.
Yeah, probably following me on Twitter is the best way to keep up with what I'm doing. I do have a website that I try and keep updated, but I'm a little behind on that. But I link all the interviews and articles and things there as well. And keep an eye on that, and you'll see the article we talked about linked in the pinned tweet at the moment. And in 8 months or so, you'll see an announcement about the book being released.
I look forward to it, man.
Great.
Pat's lost in his own background.
I just put the background in front of me. Everyone said it's always behind me. Look, I just turned around and put it in front of me. See, look. It's in front of me.
Conspiracy debunked.
And it's real. Look, I'll turn some of the lights off. Look, we'll put us back up on the actual thing, and I'll turn that light off up there. See, I can turn that off, and I'll turn.
You seem to be going to a lot of effort. It's a lot of effort to.
I'll turn the main lights off.
Truth.
There we go. Last time I did this, and can you see my cap glows in the dark? Can you see that?
Oh, so it does.
Yeah. All right. This looks terrible now. My lighting's atrocious. Oh, and I have a conspiracy theory that Chewie is actually about to blow up the Death Star. So now all the conspiracy theories.
I've done
it
before. I'll do it again.
All right, guys. Hey, thanks, Byron. It's always good to talk to you. I know we've talked before about we should get you on our thing and do a regular podcast. I think that would be great. We should talk about that later in the week or something. And Chewie, thank you, sir, for that. Look out. There's someone behind you. Look out. Someone behind you. Just be aware. There's someone behind you. And we will be back on Monday night from 10 p.m. for another edition of Big Hearing News. And that's us for tonight. I think we're pretty much done. We'll just piss off now for tonight. I'm getting buzzers and my phone's going and everything's going off. Okay, team. Thanks, Byron. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll catch you next time. Thanks, Joey. Have a great weekend. Be safe, everybody. We'll see you Monday.